Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott and welcome to another How X Should Y. Last time we dove into how Resident Evil 3 should have handled Nemesis, and I just want to talk about the way that Sony have been unveiling the PS5. Because to me, it's been, I'm not going to say disastrous, I'm not going to say awful, but I am going to say lackluster. I'm going to say that with a company as ahead of the pack as they are right now, looking at the way the PS4 has dominated the sales charts across the last few years and the sheer amount of exclusives that they've got, the general sort of brand positioning of Sony and PlayStation, I consider the reveal of the PS5 to be one of the easiest open goals in gaming history. I mean, it's a tap in, considering the performance that they've had this last generation. The whole thing practically has a giant flashing neon arrow above it, just saying, look, here's all you need to do, more exclusives, give us the new logo, show us the new console, and just carry on, just carry that momentum forward. And they've pretty much done the opposite. It's been a bit strange. One thing to compare directly against is Microsoft, because over in the Xbox camp, Phil Spencer just got out there with the Video Game Awards last year and just said, hey, look, this is the Xbox Series X. Here's what it's going to look like. Here's some gameplay footage. Here's Hellblade 2 running in-engine. It might change going forward, but here's exactly what we're aiming for. And on Sony's side, they've just been out there saying, look, we're waiting to see how the Xbox is going to be priced, and then we're going to go forward that way, which isn't a great comparative thing. In CES in 2020, they took the stage for the big, tech briefing, and all we got was a logo, which was another very plain looking logo. It was kind of the exact thing you would expect. I'm not asking them to, upend the ship, but at the same time, if you're going to just drop that basic look of a logo, you could have supplanted it with a console as well. It's that sort of stuff, just as a direct comparison, stands out to me quite a lot. There was also Mark Cerny's completely just sleep-inducing breakdown, which I 100% get that they were just going for, this is our leftover notes, this is what we were going to be doing at GDC, at the Game Developers Conference, and we're instead just going to live stream it out as this sort of, techie breakdown thing. But the fact of the matter is, if you're announcing anything on Twitter in regards to latest PS5 information from in an official capacity, and you're putting that stuff out, people are going to think, well, this is the reveal of the PS5, this is where we're going to go to get new games or a look at it or whatever, and for that to just be the most impenetrable tech-based talk that I've seen in quite some time. And I love Mark Cerny. Dude's approach to the industry is brilliant. I love that he's just is this calming, sort of zen genius dude that is operating on another level to all of us. That's great, but there's a time and a place for it, and that time and a place is not when the whole world is waiting on tenterhooks to see what your next system's going to be. You don't just throw Mark Cerny out there and hope for the best. There's just so many other ways that they could have gone about approaching the release or the reveal of the PS5. Because although I'm going to get to how I feel Sony should have done all this stuff, it's worth again noting that this generation, it took them so long to finally find their stride. And I kind of always keep going back to the idea that they only really succeeded in the early going because of what Microsoft didn't do. Microsoft didn't capitalize on their hype. Everybody used to love the Xbox 360. It was clearly the dominating system last generation. I know the PS3 sales caught up. In terms of just word of mouth, pretty much everybody at least knew someone who had an Xbox 360, and it felt like a natural segue to then follow over to the Xbox One. Obviously, the reveal of that system was an absolute tire fire, and we all came out of it going, what the hell are you doing, Microsoft? No one needs consoles to talk to, and no one's asking for you to make TV controllable by voice or whatever. And all Sony had to do was not do that. And as far as Sony were concerned, they put that viral video out as to how to share games on PS4, and they just cracked on. Because to be honest, it kind of took them 2 years to get any system selling exclusives going. 2015 was when Bloodborne finally came on the scene, and Until Dawn finally came on the scene. Before that, it was Knack, an infamous Second Sight, or Second Son, and it was The Order 1886. Games that were serviceable and fine, and I'll totally say that I actually think Knack is a surprisingly recommendable platformer, but they weren't selling systems at all. They were being thrown under the bus as what the hell are Sony doing? And it was part of why the general sort of conversation around the early years of this generation was quite negative. A lot of people were just like, what the hell? We don't even need these systems. The Last of Us just released in 2013, and so did BioShock Infinite and GTA 5. If you're going to try and justify these new consoles, we're going to need something to go alongside them. And in Sony's case, it took until 2015 before that idea of exclusives being worthwhile started to roll out. Because after that, we started getting some incredible games. 2015, like I said, had Bloodborne Until Dawn. 2016 then had Uncharted 4. 2017 then had Horizon Zero Dawn and Nier Automata. Then we got God of War and Spider-Man. Now, obviously, that loadout has slowed because Sony themselves are planning for the next generation. 2019 has very little to offer in terms of giant PS4 exclusives. Basically, the overall point I want to make is that it took quite some time for Sony to realize that actually they have this incredible lineup of genuinely amazing exclusives, first-party, second-party exclusives, and they should rely on them, they should front-load them, they should do what Nintendo do and go, look, if you want a brand identity, it also comes alongside this logo, this console, this general feeling around what PlayStation is. It's what got them to such a leading position in the first place, back with the PS1 and the PS2. I mean, the PS2 is still the highest selling console of all time, and for good reason. That thing was absolutely loaded back to back with exclusives. From the first GTAs to Final Fantasies to Metal Gear Solid, whatever. Those things would eventually jump across to other systems, but they started on PlayStation. They were always associated with PlayStation. If you were going to try and go forward with that mentality, you need to supplant them with other IPs and other things that are worth associating with that brand. Sony totally dropped the ball with that when it came to the PS3, and like I said, it took a little bit of time with the PS4 before they finally got stuff back together again. So what should they have done? Well, I'm going to suggest 3 specific things. Number 1, don't make a move until you have a lineup ready to show. Now, Nintendo have been doing this for years, where they just drop in a Nintendo Direct and go, hey, here's this logo for this thing that's eventually coming. We got that with Bayonetta 3, and we got that with the next Metroid game, and for the most part, it works. Bethesda also cottoned onto this with Elder Scrolls 6, and as much as, you know, everyone wants to see gameplay, everyone wants to see screenshots and whatever, just knowing that something is coming will engender confidence and will continue that momentum that you've had before. We know that Spider-Man 2 is coming. Brian Intihar mentioned it on a kind of funny interview, so we know that that series is going forward. We know that God of War is getting a sequel because eventually it's going to be a trilogy. Again, that's been mentioned in various interviews from creative director Cory Barlog, so why not get out there and go, look, here's some logos for this stuff that's coming. Maybe you talk about that super secret new studio that you've got that is apparently working on Uncharted 5, do a developer interview with them. It is genuinely a studio that we know exists, and yet Sony haven't really mentioned it in an official capacity. These sorts of reveal events are perfect to do deep dives with these team members and talk about what they're potentially working on. Even if it's super vague and they don't really go anywhere, it doesn't matter. We need something that builds excitement, because if there's one thing not associated with the PS5 right now, it's excitement. Number 2, nail backwards compatibility. At this stage, it doesn't really matter that the whole every single previous PlayStation being playable on PS5, that whole thing, it doesn't really matter that that was a rumor. It gained so much traction and picked up so much steam and was talked about so much by so many people, you kind of can't not do it. It reminds me of the Xbox One's launch when they said, look, we can't sell the system without the Kinect. It's just baked into the hardware. We need to do it. And then a couple of years later, no one was buying the Kinect, and they found a way. They patched some stuff in, they reworked the Xbox One's firmware, and they made sure that they could actually answer what people wanted. Literally everybody would freak the F out if they could put their original PlayStation collections into a PS5 and just have it work. It's been talked about for good reason. Sony have patented it before. I know they patent a bunch of different things that they don't necessarily run with, but these ideas are clearly being worked on and talked about internally, so why not capitalize on them? It seems too stupid to not do that, and I think the only reason would be monetary. I get that they want to sell you these games over and over and over again, and if you know, and every single publisher needs to be on board with it as well. If there's only one company that would rather sell you a remaster somewhere down the line, they're not going to just let you play the original. It's just money, it's bean counting at that point. But at the same time, have the functionality be there on the console side and just let the publishers justify their own remasters. It just put the onus back on them to make a remaster or a remake worthwhile in itself, like Crash Team Racing, Resident Evil, Spyro, or whatever, rather than denying us the availability of the original games that we put money into in the first place. And number 3, reveal the system. Don't just reveal the logo. Don't just talk around it. Don't just randomly update your blog with the new controller. That was the first thing that we saw of genuinely the next generation of PlayStation, was them just going on their PlayStation blog, just updating a blog post with the DualSense controller, not even it being held or being used. You only really have the interview that they did with Wired, the idea that they have haptic feedback and different rumble motors inside the controller, paired with the blog post update as a way to get an idea of what the next controller is going to be like. It's just so weird. You have these interviews with these different outlets as your first conversation about this new tech, and then you update this random first-party website rather than putting a live stream out and showing it to people. It doesn't need to be a couple of hours long, but you can do this stuff. Nintendo have proven with Nintendo Directs that you can just get straight to the point and people will care. Even if you just live stream something out showing what the new controller actually is, running for 5-10 minutes, a deep dive on the different analog sticks or the button pressures or whatever, anything is better than nothing. All of this applies to the system itself as well. Why the hell have we not seen the PS5 yet? At time of recording, it's meant to be out holiday 2020, which is only a few months after this. And I get that they've had various production woes with what's obviously going on in the real world right now, but it doesn't get around the idea or the fact that they do have stuff to talk about. They clearly do internally, and they're being way too conservative with what they should be actually holding up and saying, look, this is the next generation of PlayStation. Maybe this thing is subject to change. One of the last times they did this was back with the PS3. Now, some people will remember the original boomerang controllers for the PS3. I remember seeing that when I was a kid and just freaking out because it looked so different and space age and new. And obviously they didn't run with that. They ended up going with the standard DualShock and just calling it the 6-axis and actually removing the shock component from it, but the actual case was the same as the DualShock. But for a while, the PS3 system controller was going to be this weird, bent-over, banana-looking thing with buttons sort of recessed into it. And I thought that stuff was cool. You know, all they need to do is throw out something like the DualSense or like the new system shell, and even if they need to say subject to change, again, at least it gives us something to talk about. Conversation lubricates the wheels of excitement, and it's about time that they capitalized on that yet again. One last thing I want to touch on, being a lifelong PlayStation fan. Don't get me wrong, I adore the company. I've grown up with PlayStation. I actually used to wear a little raincoat with some PlayStation symbols on it back when I was 8 years old because I thought that was cool. One thing I've noticed being a lifelong PlayStation fan is that Sony are a very reactive company when it comes to, you know, leading the charge on certain mediums. You know, I remember when Microsoft or Xbox brought in achievements in about 2005, and 4 years later we saw PlayStation trophies. You also look at something like the Wii and Nintendo absolutely dominating with motion controls, and all of a sudden Sony, hey, we're going to do the PlayStation Move, and it looks exactly the same, and we're going to do all these different Move sports games that are just like Wii Sports. You know, virtual reality this generation, the Oculus has taken off. Well, we've got PlayStation VR, we're going to do our version of it as well. Just everything's a little bit less than the initial trailblazing trend that set that thing in motion in the first place. And, you know, like I said, I love PlayStation, but all their versions of these things are always just a little bit lesser when they should be leading the charge. I mean, back in the 90s when the PlayStation first came out, it was mind-blowing. The first time that we saw something running on the PS2, Tekken Tag Tournament, even Fantavision or whatever, the first time we saw those graphical changes, those advancements in the industry, it was absolutely insane. And rare have I been more excited than seeing those things come together and actually getting hands-on with something like SSX. Now, obviously, it's going to be diminishing returns in regards to graphical capabilities or what you can do going forward, but they are exploring these different avenues of how to get people excited. They're talking about this controller that, you know, you pick up a shotgun in-game and it literally feels differently to when you use a bow and arrow, that the analog controller will actually fight you a little bit when you're trying to draw a string back with a bow and arrow or something like that. Those ideas are brilliant and you need to get them out there. In terms of what would I do if I was Mr. Sony, I would get people excited. I would remember why the PlayStation brand means so much. I would discard all the mistakes that you did with the PS3, all the back and forths on the pricing and the unit models and asking people to get 2 jobs to afford it. And I would just lead with the stuff that you know people are going to respond to. That's clearly what Microsoft are doing. They've pretty much acknowledged that this generation is a total wash for them after disastrously revealing the Xbox One, and they're just looking to the future. So far, if you put up how excited are people for the Xbox Series X compared to the PS5, I just don't see any conversations about the PS5. And basically, considering their history and everything that they've put into this brand overall, you expect them to lead with a better foot forward than kind of half playing catch up and just hoping for the best, resting on their laurels somewhat and just waiting it out, waiting for the Xbox to announce their price point so they can swoop in later on, waiting for someone else to say, hey, this is the future of gaming, so that they can more comfortably come along and go, well, we're doing that too. PlayStation, I love you and I want you to be better. I know that you can be, and I grew up with you alongside. But for now, let me know what you think down in the comments. Are you excited about the PS5? What would you have Sony do differently? What kind of games are you looking forward to that you think should front load their marketing at this point? Let me know what you think, and also check out the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast if you have the time. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com. This has been How X Should Y. Let me know what you'd like me to tackle going forward down in the comments below, and I'll catch you next time.